Hi, I'm Musar. If you're unfamiliar with me, welcome to my channel. I am a music educator, I am a composer, I'm a music producer, and I actually run a Twitch stream where I provide free music education 5 days a week. You can find a link to that in the description below if you're unfamiliar, but I'm assuming a lot of the first people to come here are going to know me from that. So what we're going to talk about today is how you can build the chromatic scale that we use for all of our music using what's called the harmonic overtone series. You might be familiar with this concept. If not, we can break down almost every single sound into individual frequencies that are built off of a multiple of the original lowest frequency. I'm going to attach a link below to a really good video that talks about the Fast Fourier Transform series, which explains this concept in more depth. I definitely recommend you check that out. But in its simplest form, if I hop over here to my desktop, we have here, this is Ableton Live, this is Phase Plant, a really nice synthesizer that I've been using both for teaching and for my own productions for quite a while now. If I go ahead and play a note, we get a single pitch, we get a single tone. If we go over here, we can look at this spectral analyzer. You see we get one pitch right here. If we change this waveform over to a sawtooth wave or a saw wave, we get the same pitch, but it's a lot buzzier. And we can also see that there's a very clear pattern to these. It starts out here, then you get a gap with another one, a smaller gap, and then you get ever smaller with these waves, but it is independent frequencies. And if we applied a filter and we isolated just this frequency range, we could hear the note. I'm not going to do that, but I definitely recommend trying that at some point just to see if you could hear the different pitches. It's a very interesting exercise. The whole purpose of this is to show you how you can build it using, again, that harmonic overtone series, build this chromatic scale, which is, as I said before, what we use to write all our music. So if I start playing different notes on my MIDI keyboard or my little computer keyboard here, so I just played 12 different notes there: C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B. We go back to C. We can also get that by doing this. Notice how we're getting a bunch of different notes. You can see my stream notification. I need to get done with this so we can go on to that. Notice how we're getting a lot of different tones. And not all of them actually work. Every odd number you get is actually a new pitch. I've written it all out here, but we'll go over that in just 1 second, excuse me. I just wanted to show you this real quick, because you might have seen pictures like this online if you've ever looked up the harmonic overtone series for music. If you can't read music, don't worry. I just showed you we can find all the different notes with it. This is from Wikipedia. This goes from 1 to 20. This is the first 20 harmonic overtones. And you would actually need to go up to 32 to get every single pitch, but that gets into pitches that are not actually found in this 12-tone scale. So we'll get into that when we arrive there. But if you can read music, you might notice that this note, this note, this note, and this note, as well as this note, are all the same pitch. This is C. This is also C. This is also C. This is also C. So is this. These are all the notes C, only displaced by different octaves. And this gets into the first step of how we can build this chromatic scale. If you can divide a number by 2, you just get the lower version of that note. So this 3, you can't divide it by 2 to get a whole number, which is the important part of this. You get a fraction, or you get a decimal place. You get 1.5. So we don't have a note right here. But 6, if we divide 6 by 2, we get 3. So these two notes are actually the same exact thing. 7 plus 7 is 14. So these two notes are the exact same thing. So when you're trying to apply this to your work, there's a couple of ways you can do it. This is good for sound design. This is good for creating what is called a justly intoned scale, which is a bit of an older style of determining the notes in an octave. It was very common back in the early days of medieval era, Renaissance, Baroque, and even early classical music had this idea of a justly tuned scale. And then eventually we decided, what if we just tuned everything to the same stuff? Because if you don't, G in the key of C will actually sound somewhat different than a G in the key of D. Those are two actually different notes. But we found a little bit of math, which is what these numbers up here at the top represent, to kind of work them into something that's not quite perfect, but it's equal. That's why we call it an equal tempered scale. If we hop back over here, I can start to show you these different pitches. You see, here's the harmonic overtone series for this chromatic scale. And I'm going to focus on just the different notes for now, because we can actually just take this, delete it. We could take this, delete it. We could take this and delete it. All of these multiples we don't really need to concern ourselves with, because we know that if we take 10 and divide it by 2, we get 5. So we actually only need to focus on one note for each thing. So I'm going to delete these as I go. But if you are interested, definitely take a screenshot of this. I might even post this in the description. We'll see. But let's just go through with it. You know, we start off with the first overtone, or the fundamental overtone, the fundamental pitch. And that is the root note of whatever note we're playing. So if we're playing a C, the first overtone, the first harmonic, is going to be the root, is going to be C. Then we get an octave, which we can get rid of because it's just the same note. Then we have an octave and a perfect fifth as our next note, which would be the distance of C to G. Now I have a little asterisk here because it's not really a perfect fifth. It's not the same G that we're used to hearing. It's actually a little bit sharper. Only 2 cents approximately sharper, but nonetheless, it's a little bit higher in frequency, almost imperceptibly so. So that's why that is there. And then most of these are not actually perfect in terms of what we're expecting, but they're close enough, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. After that, we get 2 octaves and a major third at overtone number 5. Then we get a minor seventh. We technically get what's called a harmonic seventh, because the perfect fifth, the G, is only about 2 cents sharp. The major third is only about 14 cents flat. That's quite a bit, but it's not a huge amount. A minor seventh, which would be the distance between C and A sharp, or B flat, if you understand sharps and flats, is actually 31 cents flat, which is quite a noticeable amount. Once we get to about 50 cents flat, we almost get to a secondary pitch. So it's kind of a halfway between what we're expecting to hear and what we get. From there, we go to 3 octaves and a major second, which is the distance between C and D, displaced by 3 octaves. We get 3 octaves and a tritone, which is also known as an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth. which is going to be the distance between C and F sharp. Then at 13, we get 3 octaves and a minor sixth, which is the distance between C and G sharp, or A flat. Then we get a major seventh at 15, the distance between C and B, but displaced by 3 octaves. We get then a minor second at 17, which is the distance between C and C sharp, or D flat, displaced by 4 octaves. Major second again, then a minor third finally at 19, the distance between C and D sharp, or E flat. At 21, above this 20 right here, you see this 20 says E. We're technically a little bit too flat to have a real perfect fourth, and believe it or not, the perfect fourth doesn't ever actually appear in the harmonic overtone series. This is not a proper thing, but I wanted to include it, otherwise we wouldn't even really get all of the chromatic tones. We got the tritone. At 23, we're actually starting to get into pitches that aren't even used in the harmonic overtone series, but I wanted to point these out. And I call these microtones because they exist kind of on a microscopic level in between our other pitches. So this is a microtone between our perfect fourth, our tritone, and our perfect fifth. From there, we'll get 24, which is double of 12, which is double of 6, which is double of 3, which is our perfect fifth. 25 is another microtone. 26th is 4 octaves and a minor sixth. Again, 27 gets us to our final degree, which is our major sixth, but displaced by 4 octaves, the distance between C and A, just as the perfect fourth is the distance between C and F. I forgot to mention that. And then we're just getting repeated tones and microtones until we get up to 32, which is 5 octaves. So it actually takes us almost 5 whole octaves of notes to get to 12 discrete pitches that we can identify. But you can see down here, I've actually written down exactly what they are in order. So you can see harmonic 1 is going to be our root. Harmonic 17 is going to be our minor second. This is going to be in semitones from 1 to 12, because 13 semitones is going to be our kind of root. Then we have 9, which is our third, our minor, our major second. 19, our minor third. 5, which is our major third. 21, which is our 21, I believe, is our perfect fourth. Yeah, and I'm actually going to really quickly reset this to 0, 1, because technically we're working in 0 as our starting pitch. So this will actually be a little bit easier for people who are trying to translate this into their DAW, because you might go to plus 12 and realize that it's at the same pitch. So forgive me for doing this live. There we go. Here we have 5 at 21 for our perfect fifth, or perfect fourth. 11 at 6 for our tritone. 3 at 7 for our perfect fifth. 13 at 8 for our minor sixth. 27 at 9 for our major sixth. 7 at 10 for our minor seventh. And finally 15 at 11 semitones up for our major seventh. So there's a couple of things, as I said before, you can do with this harmonic overtone series now that you know these different pitches. I'm going to set that back real quick and then probably fix that after after the video. But I'm going to show you 2 quick ways. The first and most obvious way, I feel like, for people who are big into sound design is through FM synthesis. So I'm going to add in another oscillator that's just a sine wave, and I'm going to set this to, let's pick a good interval. Let's see what we got. So we got a perfect fifth, a major third, a minor seventh, a major second, a tritone. Let's try a perfect fourth, which would be 21. So let's do 21 here. I'll scroll this up like so. And then we'll see what happens to this pitch as we start to insert this tone. I'm going to click this green plus sign right here to activate audio rate modulation, which is things like frequency modulation. I'm going to set it to phase modulation, which is a form of digital frequency modulation synthesis. So you get something that feels really clean. If I set this to a different pitch, like let's say we'll set it to 23, just up 2. Doesn't sound too bad, but if I do it to a saw wave, oof, that sounds kind of painful. Let's set it back to 21. Notice how it somehow feels a little bit cleaner. If we set this down, maybe minus 36, because I believe it's 3 octaves. No, 4 octaves, so we'd be doing 48. Ooh, that's a bit much. Let's maybe do a higher one, because when we get down there, we get into what's called lower interval limits, and that's a bit crunchy. That's nice. Ooh, there we go. Sine waves to sine waves. Because generally you want to deal with simpler waveforms. Oop, I didn't want to go plus 36. I wanted to go minus. That sounds pretty cool, but you can actually see that extra frequency right up there. And if we hone in on that, that should be about an F. Notice that? That's actually right about at the pitch I was talking about, the perfect fourth. Let's go the other direction, minus 36. Ooh, now we're getting some good tones. You see that? So now we're getting some really interesting textures. Let's change this to 23 again, which we heard was the microtone. Ooh. Notice how there's more vibrations, more motion in these upper frequencies, and it also sounds a little bit more dissonant. So if you can keep yourself away from microtones, unless you're trying to go for something more atonal, more dissonant than what we're used to hearing, then you can kind of rely on just these ratios right here. And I would say the lower the ratio, 3, 5, 7, those are generally going to feel nicer than these 21, 17, etc., etc. So you can try playing around with different ratios as well as different octave displacements, because now you know if you just want to make something lower, you're just pulling it down an octave. Because, 21 is our perfect fourth, and that's what we just used, but it's a perfect fourth 4 octaves up. So if we want it to be at pitch, we would have to set it down minus 48 semitones. But let's add these together. There we go. You got C, you got F. And this gets to the next thing that I would suggest beyond frequency modulation. If I set this to a saw wave, sounds all right. Let's do a classic, what I call a dead mouse sound. It's not just a dead mouse thing, but it's kind of like this idea of you have your pitch, and then you have a note 7 semitones above that, which is a perfect fifth. It's a commonly misunderstood thing that plus 7 semitones is not what we call a seventh. I know a lot of people have made that mistake. I used to make that mistake as well, so don't feel bad if you have kind of gotten that in your head too. But it's a common sound. It's called a fifth pluck or a fifths pad, especially if we do this. Sounds interesting, right? Now, what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to go down to one of my patches, and I'm going to get this thing called Just Fifths. I'm going to turn off all these effects for now. Just give us the main sound. Notice how it sounds somewhat similar to what we had before, almost identical, but I'm not doing +7. I'm doing ×3 -12. Now, if I go in and I add in another one of those saw waves and I set that to +7, you'll notice it'll probably start to sound very similar. Doesn't quite sound identical, but it sounds very similar. Now, what happens if I set these all to sine waves? I won't even set this one because I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to set this to a sine wave. I'm going to set this to a sine wave. Actually, I'm going to set this to a sine wave just to show this off at first. We have this pitch. Do, so. Now I'll do this again. Same sort of thing. Do, so. Now what happens if I play these both together? They should sound the same, right? It should just be double amplitude, because we know that if we take an oscillator and we duplicate it, it just gets louder because we're just doubling the amplitude. So I realized while editing this video that not everyone is actually going to know why doubling an oscillator will just double its amplitude. So I'm going to be doing another video that I'll be uploading as well today to explain that. Sorry. What happens here though? Oh! That's interesting. We're getting phase cancellation. Because the two frequencies are so close together in pitch that their waveforms are not perfectly aligned. And sometimes they'll hit a point where one is at a trough, one is going down, and the other is going up. And +1 and -1 adds together to equal 0, which in terms of amplitude is silence. Now we know that this is actually about 2 cents too sharp. So we're going to turn this down 2 cents. All of a sudden, we no longer get that phase cancellation. So what we're able to do here is we're able to create for ourselves a justly tuned perfect fifth chord, which feels really interesting. And when we start to distort it, it just adds grit and power. If I went and I copied this, I set this up to 7. You hear that sort of phasery effect, that kind of thing in the background? That's what happens when the equal tempered fifth has a frequency difference between the overtones of this saw wave, and the distortion brings that out. Now listen to the justly tuned one. You get none of that. You get no phase cancellation. So you get to have a similar sound without that effect. And if you want to, you can actually add that in later, which is what I'm doing with this polyphonic lane, with this ensemble effect, and with another distortion, which is going through polyphonic processing, so that each note is getting its own ensemble and its own distortion. And you can see here we're getting that back in, and we get more control that way. And this can work with all other sorts of things. The last thing I'll leave you with, because it's getting close to noon, which is when my stream goes live, if we go in and we take a harmonically complex waveform like a saw wave, and then we frequency modulate it from a saw wave that's on the second harmonic, an octave up, or even from a sine wave, you start to get some interesting tones. Notice how it starts to sound kind of like a square wave. It's not quite, but if you look here, this second harmonic is actually starting to cancel out the even numbered overtones. So let's turn this on and off and see what happens. Notice how, apart from the fundamental, all of these upper tones that are odd numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, they're louder. So we're actually killing all these even harmonics we've found, and we're just focusing on the odd ones, which are only the new notes. So you can start to essentially, quote unquote, squarify a sound by using a multiple of 2, or using specifically 2 to cut out those frequencies from the sound. I think that is about it for this lesson. If you found this useful, feel free to drop me a like, give me a follow or a subscribe, whatever they do here on YouTube. I'm going to be trying to record a new video like this every day. Not every day, but a couple of days a week. You can see here on my calendar, where you can also see my stream schedule. But you can see I'm going to be doing, maybe not every day, but 4 days a week, probably every day. I'm probably going to find myself doing stuff on these days anyways. But at the very least, you will get a video 4 days a week. It'll be kind of rough. I'm not a video editor, so it's going to be a bit of a weird thing for me to try and get this stuff working. Mostly I'm just going to be kind of uploading these videos a little bit raw. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time with me. Thank you so much for listening to this. I hope it was educational. I hope it was helpful. And I'd love to see what you guys come up with. If y'all could drop a comment below, let me know what you found useful, what you didn't find useful. I'd love to read it. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Bye.